the road to war. In May 1916, Germany announced the suspicion of submarine warfare against non-combatants. Wilson's preparedness program seemed to have succeeded in securing the right of Americans to travel freely on the high seas. "He kept us out of war" became the slogan of his campaign for re-election. With the Republican Party reunited after its split in 1912, the election proved to be one of the closest in American history. Wilson defeated Republican candidate Charles Evans Hughes by only 23 electoral votes and about 60,000 popular votes out of more than 18 million cast. Partly because he seemed to promise not to send American soldiers to Europe, Wilson carried 10 of the 12 states that had adopted women's suffrage. Without the votes of women, Wilson would not have been re-elected. Almost immediately, however, Germany announced its intention to resume submarine warfare against ships sailing to or from the British Isles, and several American merchant vessels were sunk. In March 1917, British spies intercepted and made public the Zimmerman telegram, a message by German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmerman calling on Mexico to join in a coming war against the United States and promising to help it recover territory lost in the Mexican War of 1846 to 1848. On April 2nd, Wilson went before Congress to ask for a declaration of war against Germany. "The world," he proclaimed, "must be made safe for democracy." The war resolution passed the Senate 82-6 and the House 375-50. The 14 points. Not until the spring of 1918 did American forces arrive in Europe in large numbers. By then, the world situation had taken a dramatic turn. In November 1917, a communist revolution headed by Vladimir Lenin overthrew the Russian government. Shortly thereafter, Lenin withdrew Russia from the war and published the secret treaties by which the Allies had agreed to divide up the conquered territory after the war, an embarrassment for Wilson, who had promised a just peace. Partly to assure the country that the war was being fought for a moral cause, Wilson in 1918 issued the 14 points, the clear statement of American war aims and his vision of a new international order. Among the key principles were self-determination for all nations, freedom of the seas, free trade, open diplomacy, and an end to secret treaties, the readjustment of colonial claims with colonized people given equal weight in deciding their futures, and the creation of a general association of nations to preserve the peace. Wilson envisioned this last provision, which led to the establishment of the War of the League of Nations, as a kind of global counterpart to the regulatory commissions that progressives had created at home to maintain a social harmony. The 14 points established the agenda for the peace conference that followed the war. The United States threw its economic resources and manpower into the war. When American troops finally arrived in Europe, they turned the tide of battle. In the spring of 1918, they helped repulse a German advance near Paris, and by July were participating in a major Allied counteroffensive. In September, in the Meuse-Argonne campaign, American soldiers under the command of General John J. Pershing, fresh from his campaign in Mexico, helped push back the German army. With 1.2 million American soldiers taking part and well over 100,000 dead and wounded, Meuse-Argonne, which lasted a month and a half, was the main American engagement of the war, and one of the most significant and deadliest battles in American history. It formed part of a massive Allied offensive involving on November 9th. 2 days later, I totally missed something. It formed part of a massive Allied offensive involving British, French, and Belgian soldiers and those from overseas European possessions. With his forces in full retreat, the German Kaiser abdicated on November 9th. 2 days later, Germany sued for peace. Over 100,000 Americans had died, a substantial number, but they were only 1% of the 10 million soldiers killed in the Great War. The war at home. For most progressives, the war offered the possibility of reforming American society along scientific lines, instilling a sense of national unity and self-sacrifice, and expanding social justice. The American power can now disseminate progressive values around the globe. That American power can now disseminate progressive values around the globe, heighten the war's appeal. Almost without exception, progressive intellectuals and reformers joined by prominent labor leaders and native-born socialists rallied to Wilson's support. The roster included intellectuals like John Dewey, AFL, head Samuel Gompers. Oh wait, does that mean American Federal League? I think, okay. Head Samuel Gompers, socialist writers like Upton Sinclair, and prominent reformers including Florence Kelley and Charlotte Perkins Gilman. The wartime state. Like the Civil War, World War I created, albeit temporarily, a national state with unprecedented powers and a sharply increased presence in Americans' everyday lives. Okay, what? Like the Civil War, World War I created, albeit temporarily, a national state with unprecedented powers and a sharply increased presence in Americans' everyday lives. Under the Selective Service Act of May 1917, 24 million men were required to register with the draft. New federal agencies moved to regulate industry, transportation, labor relations, and agriculture. Headed by Wall Street financier Bernard Baruch, the war industry boards presided over all elements of war production, from the distribution of raw materials to the prices of manufactured goods. To spur efficiency, it established standardized specifications for everything from automobile tires to shoe colors. 3 were permitted: black, brown, and white. The Railroad Administration took control of the nation's transportation system, and the Fuel Agency rationed coal and oil. The Food Administration instructed farmers on modern methods of cultivation and promoted the more efficient preparation of meals. The War Labor Board, which included representatives of government, industry, and the American Federation of Labor, pressed for the establishment of a minimum wage, an 8-hour workday, and the right to form unions. During the war, wages rose substantially, working conditions in many industries improved, and the union membership doubled. To finance the war, corporate and individual income taxes rose enormously. By 1918, the wealthiest Americans were paying 60% of their income in taxes. Tens of millions of Americans answered the call to demonstrate their patriotism by purchasing Liberty bonds. The propaganda war. During the Civil War, it had been left to private agencies, union leagues, the Loyal Publication Society, and others to mobilize pro-war public opinion. But the Wilson administration decided that patriotism was too important to leave to the private sector. Many Americans opposed American participation, notably the industrial workers of the world, and the bulk of the Socialist Party, which in 1917 condemned the declaration of the war as a crime against the people of the United States and called on the workers of all countries to refuse to fight. In April 1917, the Wilson administration created the Committee Public Information to explain to Americans and the world, as its director, George Creel, put it, the cause that compelled America to take arms in defense of its liberties and free institutions.